tell us about yourself and how did you end up doing law, where you grew up and so on?
So I'm a KP. Firstly, thank you very much for the generous introduction. So I'm a KP. I grew up in Somerset West. We moved here when I was 8 years old, when my father, who was a very famous lawyer at Weber Wenzel, a very famous corporate lawyer, and my mother was a very beautiful socialite. And I tell you this because my father retired and my mother went working, farming actually. So my entire life, I've understood that women have a right to work and work hard and can be the center of everything. My life, I grew up with my mother negotiating the prices of peaches, driving the tractors, organizing the men on the farm. So gender, I don't see gender, and we can talk a little bit about that if people want to. And my father flew in and out of Johannesburg negotiating law contracts for one of the big mining companies whenever he felt that it was interesting enough to do that. When I was very small, I used to go with my father to the law firm that he was a partner at, and I used to play underneath the table where the partners used to sit, and there was a woman partner there, and she used to sort of tap her nails on the table. I sort of knew that women could be at that table, so from the age of 4 I've known I would be a lawyer. So 3 law degrees later, I'm no longer a lawyer. So when I joined the JSE, I joined the JSE to sort out some very big law cases that the JSE had, and my family had this massive conversation about how come you've been bred to be a lawyer. You've got 2 law degrees, you're about to become, I was a partner at Weber Wenzel, you're probably going to be a senior partner there one day. Why would you leave the law to go into business? Essentially to become a manager. And anyway, we decided we did. I never thought I would be doing what I'm doing today. And the reason I'm doing what I'm doing today is a couple fold. I mean, firstly, I was given amazing opportunities. I was 29 years old when I was asked to join the executive of the JSE. At the time I joined the JSE, how many people do you think work at the JSE today? How many people do you think? Roundabout. 500 people work at the JSE today. What percent do you think are women? 52%. 37 years old average, 60% black stock. Okay, that's the JSE today. When I joined the JSE when I was 29, there wasn't a single woman in senior management. There were almost nobody with degrees. Their average age was probably 40 something. So it's a very different organization that I am in today. So why am I doing what I'm doing today? I was given amazing opportunities at a very young age by incredible people who were brave enough to trust a 29-year-old to do to help evolve this old-fashioned institution into a world-class, modern, electronically driven institution. I have to say I didn't start as a CEO, obviously. I put my hand up and I was given opportunities to do things along the line, and so I've had amazing opportunities to succeed and as many opportunities to fail, which I've managed to do quite successfully too, and learned my lessons along the way, and eventually I've managed to be in this position, and I love every moment. You know about the JSE, you've got the logo, you've got the 3 letters, and it's like Woolworths, you sort of know what it is, But what is the JSE? In layman's terms, I like to describe you're very gently telling me to do this. I describe the JSE as a supermarket. And if you think about my supermarket, I've got to have interesting product on the shelf. All right, those products is what we call listed companies. You won't go to a supermarket that is near you. You won't go to a supermarket unless it has the right product. You won't go to the supermarket if the product goes fraught in 3 days' time. It has to have sell-by dates. You have to make sure the product meets its sell-by dates. So we call those listings requirements. We set requirements so that companies to be on our supermarket shelf must actually meet our quality assurance standards, and they mustn't go off. So we call those continuing obligations. Companies need to publish their results, publish price-sensitive information. This is all part of the quality assurance on our supermarket shelf. So now you've got the product. Now people want to come and buy the product. So we use technology in our supermarket to make it possible for you to buy. But if you think about a supermarket like Macro, all right, you want to be able to then when you go to do your shopping, which is probably one bucket full of shopping if you all get together, okay, you want to be able to park somewhere close, you want to be able to get into Macro, you want to be able to get your stuff and get out and pay properly. You want to know that if you've bought one whole set of Cokes, you're not paying for three. You've got to have technology to work that out. But there are also people who go to Macro with these massive trucks, and they want to be able to back into the store and buy 27 things of Coke and 40-something things of pallets of this and that. Okay, so you've got that's called wholesale in my life, and you're called retail in our life. You've got to cater for both in our supermarket. And to do that in our supermarket, we run very sophisticated technology that enables the wholesale guys to back into our store and do what they need to do quickly, and allows the retail guys to buy what they need to buy cheaply and efficiently and get their stuff done. So if you think about the supermarket, good product, good technology, our supermarket has got to be, you're not going to go to a supermarket when you get to the supermarket, you drive over potholes, you get hijacked, it's a pretty unpleasant environment to get to your supermarket. So we need to make sure that our environment is available and attractive to our customers. And what is that environment? That environment is listings requirements. It's the regulatory environment so that we build a supermarket that you can trust. And it's also the political and the economic environment. So we spend a lot of time running this supermarket, talking to political and policymakers, saying, hey, hold on. We're running this great supermarket, but you're making the neighborhood in which our supermarket is operating too tricky for people to come to us. There are too many potholes. You're going to get hijacked. Problem. So it's really a high-class, highly sophisticated supermarket.
But it seems like currently that there are a lot of people who promises others that they can make them millionaires through investing. What is your take on that?
That's really a bad promise to make. Investments go up, investments go down. And I think the most important thing is if you have disposable income, the economic truth of the matter is that you will do better putting your savings in the financial markets than you will do putting it in banks. You do better over time. Over time is the relevant point here, if you've chosen properly. But it's quite possible that you put your shares in really good stocks and that the whole market collapses because you have a global financial crisis. So investing, believing there's only a one-way track is a mistake. There's always risk in investment, but giving your money to somebody blindly or under false promises or putting it in your mattress are sure ways to make a big mistake.
What do you do on a daily basis? Like it's a Monday, 8 o'clock, you come to your office, what do you do?
Assuming that the EFF isn't marching, but generally the day has a whole lot of components to it. I mean, if you think about it, we have a whole lot of different stakeholders, and we're running a business. So a day in my life probably starts with me in the office very early. Hopefully I'll have a cappuccino by then, and then I've probably got one or two internal meetings so that I can I understand what happened over the weekend if we were doing tech implementations and the like. We often do tech testing on the weekends. So if you're studying technology, anybody, remember you don't have a weekend in your life, all right? So that's an important realization. And so we probably start with some internal meetings. If I can get to walk on one of the floors so people can see me, that's a good thing. Mondays I always have my executive meetings, 10 till 2. And then I've probably got outside client meetings. If we're listing, I'll host the listing event. If I've got a meeting with the minister or ratings agencies, that'll fit in somewhere in between. Very varied. But I can tell you that what's in my diary for Monday is probably not what's going to happen, because your day just moves according to what has happened, not only in our business, but in the country.
I'm glad you didn't move today, otherwise we wouldn't have had you here. We're glad. So what do you like most about your job, and then what are some of the challenges that you face during your job?
Well, firstly, I love my job, every element of my job. In 20 years at the JSE, there are probably 5 days in 20 that I really have preferred to have been at home, and they were when we were retrenching people. And because there's nothing worse than that. But what I love most is the privilege that comes with running an institution like ours, aiming for world class, trying to redefine world class from the southern part of Africa every day. That privilege has the opportunity to change the way people do things. So whether that's the way people trade, whether that's the product that they trade, whether the way people think about things. So for instance, some of the most exciting work I'm doing at the moment is the engagement with the Minister about South Africa, and how do we move to inclusive growth, and how do you cooperate between business and government. That is a fantastic opportunity. What's less exciting about the job is that, if you have a major tech problem, that obviously is seriously problematic for all of our stakeholders. So it matters that we're up all the time. I don't like that. I find, but it's what you do. It's actually a challenge to manage it in a way that gets us through it properly. And I think the hard discussions you have to have with your team about raising the performance game, but not necessarily being able to pay people more, because there isn't always more money to go around. It's a question of how you do what you do better, and balancing those honestly, transparently. Those are very tough conversations. The right conversations, but very tough to have.
Okay. We are also interested in your definition of leadership. How would you define leadership, and do you think leaders are born or they can be developed?
I had a lunch once at the JSE with a whole lot of women, and one of the women around the table asked the other people around the table who had been in a leadership position at school. These are all adult women. Invariably, every single one of them had had a leadership position at school. I think there is an element of some people prefer to lead, and some people just are terrible that you don't want to lead, and some people would prefer to lead and are really terrible leaders. But not everybody wants to lead. My definition of leadership is, I think leadership is part strategic tea leaf reading. So in other words, understanding what's out there and distilling it and saying, I think the direction looks like this. And getting you don't set the direction on your own as a leader, but getting people to agree, to work with you to define that. So strategic tea leaf reading is a critical component of that. If you are a person for whom you get stuck in detail, it's very, very difficult to lead, because it's too noisy for your followers. You actually have to be the person to step back, and you need detailers. You need those guys. They're very valuable. But those people must sometimes also step back and say, maybe I'm not the person to call the rallying cry. And then that brings me to the second part of leadership, which I think is cheerleading. Getting people to believe that it's possible. The most amazing things can happen if you believe it's doable. If you don't think it's doable, and they're all only ever problems, you'll never get there. So the funnest part is to actually persuade people that it's possible to do something they never thought was possible, and you'll be amazed what actually you're able to unlock. So those are the critical for me parts. I think in South Africa we have a serious problem of the Gini coefficient growing, and it is unsustainable. So when people can come and spend a whole day marching to the JSE, that means they're not at work. What they're really saying is, I need to be heard. This economic environment is not working for us. But this is the same thing that is happening in Europe. This is the refugees that are moving. That's what I'm saying. It's not just it's not an African thing, I don't think, per se. But what is absolutely true is we have a crisis happening at the moment. It's not in the making, it is happening in the moment. And we are not solving that in this country by building a social net that doesn't help people move into the middle class. So the social net, there are 16 to 19 million people in this in this country on social welfare grants of some form or another, and only 5 million taxpayers. Under no economic scenario can 5 million people fund any more than what is already being funded. So an increasing social net and an increasing suggestion that one will tax in a low growth environment people who have employment is also seems to be, there's an economic mismatch there. So we have to find a way to get inclusive growth, and if anybody had the answer, we would all be following that. But I think there are a number of components to it. The first is education at the very entry level. The reality is that we are not, as a country, going to be competitive in highly intensive labour environments like mining, etc. Labour is too expensive here. So those environments are moving into more mechanized spaces. Only people who can participate in that type of economy are educated people. Come back, you need education at a better level. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we need to build an entrepreneurial class and culture. Has anybody ever been to Nigeria? They open the aeroplane door in Nigeria and somebody is already, you haven't even left your seat. Somebody is talking to you about taking your passport and getting you to the front of the queue. There is a mercantile something there, and it's not a 419 something, it is a proper, we make things move here. There's an entrepreneurial culture there. That doesn't exist here. We've got to exist in the same way. There are pockets of it here, but not in the same way. We've got to build a really deep understanding that waiting for someone else to sort the world out, whether that's as business saying, let's get policies right, whether that's as us as individuals saying, oh, I need somebody to, if only entrepreneurial cultures create the space for themselves to do that. And we really need to invest more in that. I think there is something to be said for business finding a better way to spread the benefits of the upside of doing business. So whether that is in looking at how wages are distributed, whether that is looking at how share participation is shared amongst those in the workforce, these are the ways we have to start to think. So those of you studying economics, social movement, these are the development economics, these are the places to think. Really, we are looking for solutions in that space, because business as usual, where the winner takes all, in any culture is not sustainable. And so I really encourage you to think like, how do we challenge that? But I think we have to think of it creatively, and I think we have to think about it in terms of broadening participation rather than, and therefore broadening the pie rather than only redistributing a shrinking pie. There's zero growth in this country means more poverty. That is what happens. And we are going to have to find a way to get that growth ticking up. It doesn't go from 0 to or 0.5 to 7 overnight. You have to invest to do that, but to decide how we do that and commit to I think a different way of sharing the upside. I think you've got to look at, so education is the foundation of everything, all right? But education is an economic analysis. Somewhere along the line, education has to be paid for, all right? The way it is paid for is a combination of those who are being educated, paying for it, and then paying forward, hopefully once they have graduated and have disposable income and should be donating it back, etc. It comes through taxes and the like. So the businesses that you're focusing on contribute an enormous amount to the tertiary and primary and secondary educational environment, contribute voluntarily over and above their taxes, an enormous amount. Whether that is enough or whether that is used probably, I don't know the answer to that, but one needs to recognize there's an enormous amount of contribution made there already. There is a design a need to think about the design of the education of the funding of tertiary education. And so merely saying, well, hold on, it can't be government anymore, it's got to become, I think misses the design, the need to look at it more holistically. But I would say the companies are pay the taxes that keep the state-owned enterprises going, etc. They're contributing enormously. So there is, as I think you might know already, a massive piece of work going on in the private sector about what else to be done. But what we should do as South Africans is cherish the standard at which we educate, because all of you are one day going to be in the labor force competing with people with massive educational opportunities overseas. Your jobs, your ability to be hired and to create things has got to be honed at this institution at the top level. Otherwise you will get no jobs, because the future world is a virtual world where employers will look for people from around the world to help them, not just people who came from the university next door. So world-class education has to be the standard that we aim. Unquestionably world-class. That's what you should be asking the management of any universities. How can you guarantee me that my education is the best education in whichever field that I'm going in? And we're going to have to find ways as a country to fund that creatively. And those of us who are being educated are going to have to take our portion of that funding, because when you're employed at that world-class level, you will have a way to contribute your portion back like we all did, you know. Personally, I was involved in leading the creation of a triple bottom line sustainability index, essentially, 16 years ago. So you don't have to be on the index in order to be listed, but if you're on the index, you essentially get kudos for that, and companies and investors can take confidence that you have applied your mind to the triple bottom line. That doesn't mean, you know, hug the bunny or give money to the AIDS orphan. It means how you think about your responsibility as a corporate, as you know. I think it's unlikely that we will have a listings requirement that says that unless you pass that screen, okay, that triple bottom line screen, you will be listed. The benefit of having companies listed that meet our extensive other listings requirements, and then if they meet additional requirements getting into an index like that, is it creates an engagement platform for concerned citizens, concerned analysts, investors and the like to say, hold on, that company's in this index. Are you so special that you don't worry about these things? So in other words, you get the level of engagement on these things raised. The reality is, even though we were global leaders in this regard, and we've been fast followed by, and sometimes slowly followed by, some of my global peers, companies who do engage on this are perversely not rewarded enough, I don't think, by investors. I mean, how many times do you see in the newspaper where somebody says, I want you to disinvest from X because they're not they're not engaging on the treatment of waste properly. We're not that type of, we're not engaging like that as a society, and we should be. So it's an opportunity. I really do think it's an opportunity, and you see this as a concern much more from the youth now than you do from the older investors. So I haven't studied, I was at Yale in 2006, so 10 years ago. There was such a critical difference between Yale and even when I studied at Cambridge, which was 1994, so 10 years between roundabout. The American style of studying is very Socratic. You don't have the professor sort of gives you some outlines and talks to you about the concept, and then it's just an engagement. And I sat at the back of these lecture halls, and everybody was on social media, the websites and everything, challenging what he was saying. So if he said, I think the first man on the moon was and then everybody was on their computers and, no, excuse me, sir, that can't possibly, you're absolutely, so that's a bias, and so it would go. They wouldn't always sir it, actually, They're very frank. It's a much more demanding style of lecturing. When I was here, and I don't know how it is now, but it was very much black letter law. As a lawyer, black letter law university. This is what private law says. These are the essentials of a contract, and it stood me in great stead as a lawyer. But it didn't challenge you to challenge. And if I look at some of the students we get from overseas who come and do internships, etc., the Afrikaans have a word parmantig. They're a little bit like tell you how it is. We're quite sort of we hold back as South Africans. I think it's a South African thing. It's the way we are taught. It's not. They don't think that as a respect issue when they're sort of so front-footed about everything. But they're much more like that. They're much more likely to want more and higher. What they realize is they're competing. So if you went to a top English university, you don't think I went to Cambridge, so I'm cool. They're recognizing I went to Cambridge, but there's this chap who went to Tsinghua University in Beijing, and he's going to eat my lunch. So they're on this, I've got to be better all the time. Every single student we get from overseas understands they haven't arrived. Now, we would look at them and think, she must have arrived. Do you know what I mean? They know they haven't arrived. They're wanting to be better, they're wanting more experience. And I asked you how many people have been to Nigeria. No one's been to Nigeria. I went to Yale. When I studied Yale, I went to I did a Chinese course on Chinese political economics. There were 60 people in that course, roundabout, all white Americans. The course was taught in English for my benefit. They all spoke Mandarin. They'd all been to China. They were first year students. Okay, so that's their worldliness. We are quite provincial as South Africans. We talk about going to Africa like it's some other place. How many people have been to Zambia? We're somebody from Zambia, but how many people have been to Zambia? I've cycled around Zambia. Have you? So we need to realize the world is out there, and we're competing. And I think that's the critical thing. The more inquisitive we are, the stronger we will be as a nation. The more we have diversity in our DNA. Okay, it should be our competitive advantage as South Africans. Learning from each other, making ourselves stronger. This is what I see from these international students that I come across. So I'm not great on these biggest economies, what do you call league tables, really, because that's a reflection of the local currency to the dollar, and that's not always within your give. The JSE doesn't play enough of a role on the African continent, is the reality. We are the world's 18th largest exchange, and we trade about 25 to 30 billion rand a day. All right, so $2 billion a day. Okay, Nigeria, which is the third largest exchange on the continent, trades $10 million a day. You're talking, orders of magnitude different, and so this is a deep and liquid, very sophisticated capital market, and we fund essentially through the capital markets the South African companies that are doing things on the continent. So to that extent we play a role in the unlocking of the continent, but not necessarily in the growth of the South African ranking on the continent. Though the companies that we list, the companies that our pension funds are invested in, are all adding to the economy generally. But I certainly wouldn't say we would draw a line between what we do as opposed to how we are used and what's happening with the league tables. Okay, so one of the reasons that the rand has strengthened has got nothing to do with South Africa. it's got to do with Brexit, okay, and what's happening in the States. So one of the things we have to be wary of is looking at the South African markets and many other global markets where there is such diversity, and saying it was only this that caused that movement. Okay, there are things that only this causes that movement. Replacing the finance minister twice in a weekend tends to do that. But otherwise, there are a whole lot of other things that also impact. So I'll come to the elections, but I do think that the recent rand strengthening has got far more to do with global impacts than anything we're doing here. But the market responds to political risk because all of us, the pension fund trustees and the asset managers who manage people's savings, international investors, look at risk and say, are people, the money on that I'm managing, is it safer in this type of investment or that type of investment? And so it's a completely rational thing to do, to say, if I'm worried about an outcome, uncertain about an outcome, I'm going to do something else. Let me tell you, people will weigh up whether to invest in South Africa or Kazakhstan. Okay, now none of us actually even want to travel to Kazakhstan, notwithstanding my plea for diversity and travel, okay? Because we'll be scared about the political environment there. But investors will look at us and say, this is such an uncertain space that I would actually prefer a world I know and don't like than an uncertain world. All right, so that's something to think about. Come back to the Minister of Finance gets replaced twice, the markets drop out of bed. Okay, that's got nothing to do with choosing a party versus another. It's to say that risk profile is too scary for us. Okay, and it is not driven by an investor or international investors, or the entire market reacts. And if you go back to Nenegate, pensioners lost an enormous amount of money. An enormous amount of money. The biggest investor in this country is in fact the government employees pension fund. So mostly government employees became poorer for that through that. It's a bit of a bizarre thought of it actually. But you look at the political results now. I think we should be exceptionally proud as a country about how this politically noisy environment has dealt with democratic voice. Because what you have is, unless you're listening to Cloudy, then or not listening to Cloudy, what you have is a lot of political discussion publicly. You can say what you need to say publicly in this country. That's to be recommended. Then you've got the ruling party taking a massive decline in many of the metros in which, and responding in a completely mature political way, saying we respect the outcome of the democratic voice. We don't particularly enjoy it, but we respect the outcome. Then you have the discussions around coalitions, and you have interesting positions being taken by minority parties, so that the respect is given to them, to what they interpret to be the will of the people who voted for them. I mean, I think as a country, that is quite something, and so I think people will look at that moment and say, wow. The fact that the country can deal with such tricky issues democratically is to be credited for the country. So it's actually a credit to the country. And we will see how the rest of the year plays out, because this is going to continue to be noisy. Coalitions are never quiet and never calm. And the markets will do what they always do when there's state of flux. Look at it and say, look at it sometimes and feel a little bit more comfortable. The thing to be worrying about really as a country for the next 6 months is whether or not we start to make meaningful steps in social inclusion, in growth initiatives, state-owned enterprise management. Those are the things that we're going to have to really worry about. And the markets will react dramatically on those sorts of things. Even the senior British politicians don't know what it will do in London, okay, or for the whole UK. Even they don't know. They are busy working through the detail. It's got some very unintended consequences. So in this time, when you have big banks, all based in London. If London is closed, the JSE volumes drop about 15% in the day. Okay? So it's a massive part of our market. But they're all based in London. So imagine London leaves the European Union. Imagine if the big banks move their center of activity to Frankfurt. We will be talking about activity coming out of Germany, okay, rather than out of London. First step. Second thing is, even if activity stayed in London, all right, because London managed to persuade the bankers to stay there, but still left the Brexit. There are interesting things like all of our regulation, all of our standards to which we regulate are benchmarked against European standards. Now London moves out of Europe. Are they going to set European plus standards? What? I mean, what happens now? Are they going to recognize European compliance? We spent all this time and effort complying with European legislation. Even if they set their own standards, will they say, no, but we'll recognize the fact that you are immense complexity? And when we ask the serious policymakers in the UK about this, their answer is, we don't know the answer. So it's going to be fascinating for us. You're going to keep a watching brief on this for quite some time, I think. It's actually interesting. If you look at the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Watch, cybercrime is rated as the #1 worry of most CEOs. I can tell you it's not my #1 worry, but it is the #1 worry for most CEOs. The reason it's not my #1 worry is that sometimes it's useful being at the bottom end of the African continent. People, and not as big as New York, and not as big as London, etc. People are going to go after the big targets first. But we have endless amounts of cybercrime protection. You know, whether that's firewalls, whether etc. etc. We pay people to hack us. We pay people to build us better firewalls, etc. You can never spend too much on cybersecurity, but you can't afford to spend as much as you could spend, because you've got to spend on other things too. And so we're definitely a target, just because it's a high-profile entity. Then you do get the cyber versions of Occupy Wall Street, the anonymouses of this world who would like to prove a point. I don't know what the point is, but they'd like to prove a point. And certainly some of our global peers have had groups like Anonymous sort of post things on their thing saying we were here, as opposed to actually interrupting the system. But it's technology that isn't hackable hasn't been built yet. So you just do the best you can to make sure that they can't, and you improve it all the time. You need the sort of bright young things sitting in their mother's basement with no lights. You need them to come and try and hack you, and then we do. We actually have these hack groups that's the profile of many of the people who are doing their best to, at our request, to show us where the chinks are. The impact, though, of the whole fees must fall debate was the whole question of people starting to focus on the fact that the youth had a voice, and as you know, many of those protests did not end as peacefully as they should have ended. Those all have an impact in increasing the risk profile of the markets. Investors saying something's happening here, this isn't normal, what do we have to do? But I'd have to check the numbers to say what actually happened in those 3 weeks. You might actually have the answer, I don't know, but that's not at the top of my mind. But certainly a raised awareness of the fact that this is a social issue that needs to be really linked into, definitely there. There's very little, it comes back to there's little disposable income in this country, and so the savings of the people through pension funds, etc., are really the major source of capital into investments. And so the big asset managers actually are the ones that direct most of the investment because they're the ones managing the big pension funds and the like. We do need more asset managers and more platforms for retail investors. You guys as students should be, saving 10% of your disposable and putting that in the markets today. I'd be surprised how few of you, if any of you, are doing that. And there are vehicles to do that today through your online banking platforms, etc. So it isn't a one-size-fits-all. Different types of investor services are needed for different types of investors. But you do really want to get more people investing at a very young age, comfortable with the concept of savings, because you can invest 500 Rand a month in an exchange traded fund and finish your university course with that in your pocket, okay, tax free, 30,000 Rand a year. Who of us has 30,000 Rand a year? Not many of us, okay? But you can get up to 30,000 Rand a year tax free, even if it's the first 500. It's a start. So it's that sort of thinking, and you need people to help you think like that. And the really big asset managers don't want to take your phone call when you're going to phone them and say, excuse me, I've got my 500 Rand, please can you help me? So we spend a lot of time at the JSE going around to schools helping people understand how to save, how to trade, running our trading game. You can run it, it's run here at the university too, to get people understanding that they can take control of themselves. They actually don't need a middleman to invest. So it's both. The question on gender is a fascinating thing. I told the story about where I came from because I don't relate to myself in gender terms. But I know that it's important for people that there is a woman that is the head of the stock exchange. It's aspirational. It shows it can be done. As I said, I was given, I think, the chap who hired me, really took it must have been the bravest thing, one of the bravest things he'd done, to take a 29-year-old firstly, and put her on Exco. I don't know today whether I would hire too many 29-year-olds on my Exco. Do you know, it's quite challenging, really. And then it's a woman, okay? And I don't relate to my journey in gender terms, but what happened was I was given these opportunities, and even when I did stuff up spectacularly from time to time, because we all stuff up spectacularly, or at least I did, I was backed through the trouble, and I was given lots of opportunities to really succeed. And you've got to succeed more than you stuff up. So I was given lots of opportunities and I succeeded. So we didn't ever at the JSE have a strategy to hire more women, but we certainly had a strategy on diversity. I mean, diversity is one of our 5 core values. And that's diversity in everything. Diversity in age, in gender, in race, in qualifications. Because it's only if you embrace diversity that you have different perspectives around the table challenging any given issue. When you put diversity at the center, then when you do an interview for a hire, for instance, okay, you don't look for someone who looks like you. You look for someone who doesn't look like you. In fact, you deliberately go out to find someone who doesn't look like you, because you're saying, hold on, I know people who look like me. I know how they think. I want people who think differently. And that really is at the core of what we do. And we've discovered over the time, we have much more focus on race than we do on gender. But we have discovered over the time that as we've had senior women in senior leadership positions, we have attracted really senior women. I could hire very, very senior women very easily. In fact, I think I have a gender problem now, too many women. And we've deliberately gone out to hire men, so that you're back in the diversity space. It's quite an unusual thing that. I just think you have to think in those sorts of on those broader terms. And then finally, your question on difficult conversations. Difficult conversations are never easy. There isn't an easy way to have a difficult conversation. But difficult conversations are more difficult if you delay them, and they're more difficult if they're not authentic. So if I'm having a big performance conversation with someone, it's never a you did. I don't know that the word you is there. in that conversation. It's probably, my perspective on performance is the following. And then you look at, if you're authentic about it, you're not bringing the person down. You're talking about the output. And you're saying, look, that doesn't cut mustard. I think you'd agree with me on that. And we've got to raise the game here. At the JSE, you know, we aim for top level performance, and this isn't that performance. So we have to do things differently. How are we going to build, is there anything I can do that can help you perform better? That's the nature of a difficult conversation. But ultimately, it is better to say to somebody that was off than to struggle along with someone who can't deliver. Because what happens when you struggle along with somebody who can't deliver is the entire organization can't deliver. So you got to have those conversations. That's the role of a manager. Yeah, good questions. Emerging markets. The reality is it's not a homogenous group. So we've got, you know, what happens in Brazil is different from what happens in Russia or Turkey or South Africa, and we often talk about the fact that you actually have to stand out from the crowd. So why we work so hard to make sure that our regulation looks and is internationally comparable, our technology is internationally comparable. When investors want to choose to invest in South Africa, we never want them to worry about the fact whether or not the JSE will be open for them to do whatever they want to do. All they have to worry about is the economy and the companies they want to invest in. Not all emerging markets think like that. When Russia had a problem, they closed the market. Okay, when Egypt had a problem, they closed the market. What does that do to an investor? I have my money, pension funds money, invested in a country and I can't get it out. So you have a very severe, like a risk shock as soon as that happens. And we try to create a space that says you'll never worry about the JSE. You can worry about the other things involved in that investment decision, but never about the platform through which you're investing. So the reality is that there are cycles in investment. I've been through many cycles when emerging markets are the flavor of the month, when we start markets between advanced emerging markets and pioneers. The reality is investors are looking for yield. They will go where they think they'll get a better upside to their investment for the risk that they are prepared to take. And they're fickle in this. So one investor we spoke to said he spends about 20 seconds, not minutes, seconds a day wondering whether to stay in a country. So you've got to catch his imagination before he's made his big investment. And then he's just going to get through his investments like that. And the rest of his day is spent analyzing the new investments he wants to make. So you don't want, as an emerging market, to be getting them that 20 seconds of attention. You just don't want that. You want to be in his firmament and you want to stay there. So the reality is emerging markets are takers of flow, not creators of flow. There's very little that we can do as an emerging market unless you are the size of China. Brazil had its moment, frankly, its Lula moment where it was big enough to attract. Nigeria could do the same if it's got its A into G, but it's a way away from that for a while. But if you're a big enough economy, you can actually start to essentially create the flow. For the rest, you are going to take to a large extent what's happening. So I expect emerging markets to continue to have quite a bumpy ride for quite a while, and then between us, between all the different emerging markets, you can open your mouth and change feet. You can get foot and mouth disease very quickly, because if you start to change finance ministers, you start to do things, they're going to say that's the 20 seconds. And so we are earning every day that capital, the capital allocation. And I think that's the most important thing as emerging markets to realize. People do not have to come to us. They come to us because we offer yield that is worth the risk. I loved studying in Afrikaans. I did all my orals, everything in Afrikaans, and I come from a pretty un-Afrikaans family. And I had the privilege of speaking at a forum a while ago where the head of the Bushmen was speaking. And you had some quite established speakers there, and he pitched up, and he was in his loincloth, and he spoke He spoke for 10 minutes. It's the most moving speech I have listened to in no notes. He spoke for 10 minutes about what the loss of Afrikaans is doing to his culture. Because he talked about the fact that that is the language, the vernacular for him and his people to talk to each other about their history. And that you undervalue the language, you essentially, for him, you're taking his history away. So that I thought was hugely profound. But when you are extremely competent in Afrikaans, you are not going to get a job in China. Okay? You have to be competent in the language of the world, and the language of the world is English. So I don't know if it's that's not the same as saying the only language of tuition should be English. But the chap from the Bushman, he made me think about the impact of language on culture, and that's something I think one needs to think about. But you students, you think about language a lot more than people in business. I do know that from a business perspective, I spend a lot of my time talking Afrikaans to my clients. I wish I could say I spent a lot of time speaking French, but I certainly spend some time speaking German to my German clients. Language is a connection in one way or another. What do I do in my personal time? Twice a week I cycle at 5 o'clock in the morning, so I'm up at 4:30. But those days I get to work a little bit later than 6:30. I probably manage to get to work at about 8 then, because you've got to get through the traffic to get to work. So I do that, and I am lucky to have a house husband. So, but I thought you were going to ask me how I achieved that, because we met here, and that was the negotiation. That was the deal, that I would be working and he would look after the children. And I think that my two boys are extremely lucky to have a dad who actually leads by example. With 17-year-old and 15-year-old, that's very unusual to have to have a dad who's there all the time, you know. And what we do in our private time, if you saw me privately, you wouldn't recognize me. I'm probably anyway cooking with my sons or doing something in the garden. I'm very jealously guard my private life, and my children have different surnames. So even though they are known to their friends as my children and to their teachers and so on, that's not publicly known, and I prefer it that way, because our world is a cruel world, and you don't really want them to have to take the burden of me. You know. I don't think they should have to do that. The question of race, we were much more targeted about racial diversity. Much more targeted about racial diversity long before BEE codes. And we started essentially by embracing the conversation of transformation, where people came from. Just like, where did you come from? What was your experience of growing up? Most of the black people at the JSE were security guards. They were all computer operators, or people who had been the chalkers on the board, on the floor, who became computer entry operators. The conversations with some of those guys about their experience of school, what does school look like? What does it do? What are the teachers like? How do you get to work every day? Those things stick with me today. I've still got those staff members today. So we started at the conversation, like, who are we as people? What matters to us at the JSE? And at that recognition that we're all South Africans and we all have a shared destiny. And then we do have targets, and we do have very clear preferences about who we hire. And that may sit uncomfortably with some people, but that's how you build diversity. You have to transition from something to somewhere else. And once you've built that diversity, then you can start to ease up a little bit. Look, if I was the person that had written the book about how to achieve social inclusivity, none of us would be worrying about fees must fall, and we would all be in a new world. But I do think it starts after education. It starts with things like access to the means of production. So share ownership, if you're working, you can save. So you've got to get people into that workspace, into that working environment. If you're working, you can save. If you save, you'd like to get them to be co-owners in what you're creating. So I think there's something in that space that will be the start, and then the whole entrepreneurial. South Africa, relatively speaking, apparently has very little illicit flows compared to some of our other places on the continent. The JSE itself doesn't regulate that. I mean, we have the relevant FICA legislation, etc., to make sure that people are identified and can't do that, but we don't actually regulate that. But ultimately, with flows, it's all about transparency and about not political will to catch, to actually apprehend. Because often people who move money are well known, well connected, etc. You've got to be able to identify that, to have the skills, etc., to identify it, and then you've got to have the will to stop it.
Thank you everyone for coming, the US students, our students, our partners, Kes and Fred FVZS. And I'd also like to thank Ms. Newton-King for coming today. I guess we learned at least 2 career choices now. Either we apply to hack the JSE or we become entrepreneurs. Thank you for taking your time and gracing us with your presence today. As a token of appreciation, we'd like to transfer the certificate to you, and we recognize you as one of our honorary members. Thank you very much.